I found out what the problem was on Monday, and working with the tech guy was able to fix it. For whatever reason, the calendar thing that I had set up wasn't sending out notifications. And I thought I'd pushed all the right buttons and clicked all the right daily jobs, but everybody should have gotten notices that we now have, excuse me, scheduled meetings for the rest of our block together on both Mondays and Thursdays. The other thing is that I forgot totally that Monday, I guess, is Memorial Day. And so I'm going to assume that you guys don't want to have a meeting 8 o'clock Monday morning. So we are going to do a Tuesday morning meeting instead at 8 o'clock, and that one will only be for about 45 minutes or so instead of an hour and a half. And I also wanted to ask if I'm thinking we may want to also have a couple Wednesday meetings or do something else so that people can get their live meeting attendance in. Our first code word of the day is flabbergast. I'm so pleased to see so many people here this morning. It's at least 6 times as many as showed up on Monday. How many of you had had an opportunity to watch that video that I did on Monday?
I have.
All right, good. Excellent. I wanted to go over it again, just kind of briefly, just to reiterate the kinds of things that we are exploring with module number 3. And I'm also hoping that today people with questions about the annotated bibliography and other things can ask them as well. I have been answering questions on email, and there are some questions that people have asked on email that seemed obvious that probably everybody would want to know, and so I've sent out emails to the whole class answering that question. And I'm thinking that as people move forward, we may want to have a couple more opportunities for live get-togethers just so that everybody can fulfill their attendance requirements. We're going to start, let's see, today is the 27th, and I'm going to take attendance right now. I see only 6 people on the screen. Lydia is one of them. See, looks like Lauren is here. McKenna. If I'm saying your name incorrectly, please let me know. Kenya. Looks like you're here. Elvin. And Samantha. Or Sam, rather. Okay, so you guys, you 6 that I have down, don't need to email me code words or anything like that because you are actually attending this live. If it's all right, I'm going to go ahead and quickly go through. I have a short PowerPoint that has about 8 slides on it. And I talked about this quite a bit more extensively on Monday. And I'm just going to go through and get some feedback from people that are here today and see what you think about it. But I'm going to just go through it rather relatively quickly. So I'm going to switch to that. Before I do that, does anybody have any fun plans for the 3-day weekend? Anybody have any really horrible plans for the 3-day weekend?
Catch up with homework.
I don't know if it's...
Catch up with homework? Yeah, I think that falls under probably the horrible. What about you, Lydia?
I don't know if it's good or bad, but I'm going cemetery hopping.
That can be a lot of fun. I remember when I was younger and my mom was alive, we would take pieces of paper, and she had these huge 1-inch wide crayons that were crayons that were for making rubbings. And we would find the very oldest cemeteries we could and find the most far in the back, most out of the way, most disused and disrespected gravestones we could and make rubbings of them. And that was a lot of fun. It was fun kind of trying to imagine what the world was like when that person was alive. Okay, I'm going to set this up. Let's see. All right, now everybody should be able to see this big red tree. Can all of you see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Now there's 6 people in here. By the end of this, I would like to hear from, I would like to hear a response from at least one response from each person here. So when you do talk, please let me know what your name is, so I can make sure and get you down. Now this first image, I want to show this slideshow because this project number 3 or module number 3 deals with phrase biomorphic abstraction. And I wanted to talk about that just a little bit, make sure that everybody understands kind of what that means. My supposition is that all of you as professional artists are most likely engaged something within the graphics or illustration type universe. And so your principal responsibility is quickly and easily communicate with whoever's viewing your work the message of the person that you're working for. And I'll talk a little bit about where that kind of imagery might possibly fit. But I think it's important to be aware that in the realms of art and expression, there is a broad range of the level of information or the kind of information we give visually or physically to communicate something. Now in this first image of a tree is pretty straightforward. Any of the 6 of you have a hard time figuring out that this was a tree? You know, aside from the helpful label right there, did any of you have a hard time identifying this as a tree?
No.
No.
No. What are some of the qualifiers that we see that help us to realize this is a tree? Can you guys see my mouse? My mouse
Yes.
is
Yes.
okay. So what's this right here?
The trunk.
I'm sorry?
The trunk.
Right. What are these?
Branches.
Branches, yeah. What are these little things?
I assume you're going for leaves.
Leaves. Exactly. And so we can see very quickly 3 pretty much obvious identifiers that help us to qualify this as a tree. Now, over here behind this, what are these here, do you think? What are these shapes here in the background that are look like they're pretty much faded out?
More trees.
More trees, yeah. And what's this right here on the left-hand side with all the little branches?
Other trees.
Yeah. So these are all things that the artists have included to help us realize and recognize what these things are. But I like this as the first image because, well, would you say that this is a more realistic tree or a more abstracted tree?
Realistic.
Yeah, I believe so. I think it is more realistic because we have those easily identified elements, the trunk, the branches, the leaves. And you can also go in a little bit. You can see some of these areas where the leaves are picked out so they look like the actual leaves would. And overall, if you were standing somewhere near a lake and you just looked out across the lake, your eyes probably wouldn't be able to make these shapes out in the distance, but we can tell that they are trees, and there's enough information there to communicate that to us. Overall, I think that this is a relatively realistic tree image. We go to this. This is also, what would you say on this? On that scale of realism to abstracted, where would you say this would fall?
Pretty strongly towards realism.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And there are a couple elements right away, or a few elements, like this passage of trees. These looks like there's 3 trees here, maybe a birch, and then 2 others right here. That's pretty rendered pretty realistically. Right here in the right part of the foreground, there's some low-lying tree stubs, and those seem to be pretty realistic. In the center, toward just lower of the vertical center, and right in the horizontal center, we have this set of 2 old-growth trees right here. That's pretty obvious. And then as we move back, those clouds look pretty realistic, and the mountains, you can see the buildup of layers of air are turning them blue and kind of fading them out. And I think overall, this is a pretty realistic depiction. This is from a school of painting called Hudson River School. And when you watch the Monday lecture, I tell you why I really like that school of art. There are some other elements that are going on in this that I think make it a very interesting image to look at. But overall, yeah, we're talking about realism. Okay, now here, would you say this is more realistic or more abstract?
It's slightly more towards abstract than the other 2. It's more stylized.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. Now on this, what are some of the identifiers that clue us in as to what it is? First off, what is this still a tree?
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, it's still a tree. Now, what are some of the identifiers that help us to label this as a tree?
It still has leaves and branches and a trunk.
Yeah, yes, excellent. And it's also kind of roughly the same shape as that one red tree, or that one orangish red tree. Some of the elements that kind of move this towards stylization is, do you think that there are very many instances in the natural world where branches are shaped exactly like they are in this?
Yeah.
I'm thinking perhaps willow, maybe. But for the most part, most trees, especially fruit trees, are going to have branches that don't curve nearly as evenly and nicely as this. How about those leaves? How many times have you seen a tree that have every single leaf on it facing the same direction?
Never.
Yeah, I think never. And then with the flowers, notice that all the flowers have 5 principal petals. How often does that happen when you just happen to turn and look at a tree and you see all the flowers have their centers pointed directly at you and they're all completely open at the same way? How often does that happen?
Never.
Yeah, never. So yeah, you're absolutely right. This is very stylized. Now there are exceptions to that. We can see a little bit left of the center, vertically and horizontally, we see one of those red roses is turned to the side, and it looks like almost a bud. We see some other flowers that we see from the side, like the orange ones right underneath the partridge, on just right of center towards the bottom. And there are some other things that are going on in here that really clue us in that this is stylized, like those things that almost look like claw marks in the white background. Who can tell me what those actually are?
Grass blades, aren't they?
What's that?
Grass blades?
Yes, exactly. They're leaves of grass. They're tufts. This is done. It's based on a tradition called Persian miniature painting, and the artists would put in enough information so you would know exactly what was going on. and they would stylize it enough, not to make it easy necessarily on the artist, but they would stylize it so that you would realize that you're looking at something that is within that imaginal realm. You're in the imaginary universe. So this was done specifically to make you realize that you are not looking at the natural world. You're looking at something that represents a slightly higher plane. And I think it's absolutely fascinating to see the difference between this and that orange tree, and to recognize that all of us can see immediately that this is still a tree. Okay. Anybody know what this image is from? I may be wrong, but I believe that this is the state flag of New Hampshire. And I think it's interesting what it references. But what is that green shape in the white square? Anybody tell me?
Still a tree.
Yeah, it's still a tree. And it's incredibly simplified, isn't it? Can we see where the trunk is? And we still have the trunk there. Then what is this right here? This roughly organic shaped triangle. Can anybody tell me what part of the tree that is?
Yeah, it's the leaves.
Yeah, it's the leaves and the branches. Yes, excellent. So, but this looks so completely different from that first image, doesn't it? Would you say that this is more realistic or more abstracted?
Abstracted.
Yes, very much so. Now, can everybody recognize that progression from that first tree image to this? It's still very much a tree, isn't it? Now, let me know what you think about this next one. Anybody know what this is?
Well, I'm gonna guess it's a tree from context.
Yes, that's good. This is something called kanji. It's a Japanese pictoglyph writing, and it is based. A lot of kanji is based on stylized depictions of objects that are either representing the object themselves or representing something associated with the object. And this is very much a tree. Can anybody tell me what element of this is? Well, actually, no, I'm going to use my mouse and you tell me what element it is. Let's see. What is this?
Those two branches.
Yeah, this is that, like in the previous tree we saw, you have these angular lines here. They kind of are the edges of the branches. These angular lines here are the same thing. They represent the edges of the branches. So what's this one?
The trunk.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, does anybody know what this could be right here? What do you think that this horizontal line could be?
Maybe like one of the branches?
It could be. It's interesting because you're the first person who said that. Most people are thinking, well, maybe it's the horizon. Maybe it represents the ground that the tree is growing out of. But it could be a number of different things. But I like that. Maybe it is more branches. Yeah. But it's fascinating because in context, we know that this is a tree. And in kanji, this represents tree, which brings us our second code word is kanji. But it's fascinating because if you just showed this to a completely random person, do do you think that they would be able to see the tree in this? Or if you just asked them without leading, what is this? Do you think they would have any idea?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think you're right. There'd be no clue. And this is where we start getting into abstraction. Seriously into abstraction. This is abstracted. This is abstracted, but a little bit less. By the time we get to this point, the abstraction becomes something that's almost its own thing. And like one of you said, we know it's a tree primarily because of context. Now here's another image. This is even farther past. This is something where we start moving towards almost non-objective, the non-objective end of the abstraction spectrum. Can anybody see any elements of treeness in this?
Yeah, kinda.
Where do you see it?
Where that like just like paint stroke is, I would assume that those are the leaves. And then the ones that are behind it as well, that are just like another like tree in the background.
Yeah, I think you're right. I see something like a poplar, a long, narrow type tree, like right here particularly, and right here. And I see that these little areas right here kind of function for me as a trunk. And I see this as like maybe a different species of tree that's behind even this one. But yeah, this is done by a friend of mine. Her name is Karen Green Recor. She paints on steel slabs, essentially. And she considers herself kind of a cross between a landscape artist and an abstract painter. And if you had no idea we were talking about trees, this would just be splashes of color, wouldn't it? And I think it's kind of interesting if we put that context in, suddenly it becomes something else. Now, on the spectrum between realism and abstraction, where does this lie? Where does this fall?
Abstraction.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about abstraction, realism, of course, is where the artist is maintaining something of a one-to-one visual correspondence with the world around. And as we go to abstraction, what we're doing is focusing on different elements of something, expanding that focus, and emphasizing that element, as well as simplifying it quite a bit. So one of the principal hallmarks of abstraction is simpler shapes. We take out a lot of the stuff that we feel is unnecessary. Okay, now with all that context and everything like this, who knows the artist? Who knows the artist that painted this? Anybody?
Does the artist start with an M, like the first name or the
Yeah.
last name?
Yeah,
Right.
the last name. Right.
Is it Mondrian? Something like
Mondrian.
that.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yes, excellent. Now the time period of this painting is excellent, very very good, because a lot of people have no idea. They know they've seen this kind of stuff, but they don't know who the artist was. So good job on that. Yes, this is Pete Mondrian. He was painting in an area or a time period where the world itself is still dealing with colonialism, but in a relatively short amount of time, and I'm talking within 2 or 3 decades, people started producing airplanes and cars, and train travel became luxurious instead of a chore. And people were developing lighter than air flight even, and starting to move around that way. And on the other side, people had, you could make long distance phone calls for the first time in the world's history that we're aware of anyway. And those technologies of communication and travel we're exponentially expanding the possibilities of people's lives. Up until a relatively short time ago, a huge majority of the world's population lived and died within 20 miles of where they were born. Can you imagine that? Can you even imagine that in today's world? Living and dying, living your entire life and dying within 20 miles of where you were born? What would that be like? When I think that part of what Pete Mondrian was trying to do was address mechanism of society, or the mechanics of society, but also looking at the world is becoming. Maybe I think that this may be a reaction to the idea that maybe the world was becoming a lot more chaotic, apparently, because things are moving so much faster. And he said he was trying to parse things down to, instead of having diagonals, just doing horizontal and vertical lines. Instead of having a lot of color, he would use just white as the background, black lines, and then the primary colors and sometimes green. But from the context that we have, what do you think this painting is an image of? Any idea? Anybody want to try?
Well, I'm gonna assume it's a tree again, but I don't know. With some
Yeah.
hesitancy, I say that.
No, I think that that's a pretty safe assumption. This is a landscape painting. It's very much a landscape painting. And if we look at, if you try to imagine a typical landscape, it's usually mostly the undulating land with some elements that add interest. And these horizontal lines, starting with the center one, kind of made me think of horizon and maybe fields or parks or something. And then I believe that that dot of blue references a tree in a park. So that's my thought. But yeah, this is definitely a landscape. Now, for everybody who doubts me, and it's amazing because I will, in a class of 20 or 30 people, I will get people that argue with me, even though Pete Mondrian talks about his own landscapes himself. And then I show them this picture. These six images, and we look especially at the one in the bottom right that's very similar to what we just saw. These six images are not only all trees, but I believe they're all for the same tree, and they're all done by Pete Mondrian. If we talk about that spectrum between realism and abstraction, well, first, is it mind blowing to anybody that all six of these are of the same tree?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's really interesting, like the different ways that people can see, like, a simple object and can like make it different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? And chronologically, the one in the top left was the first, one in the bottom right was the last in the series. But yeah, it is fascinating to see how even one person can share the same thing in so many different ways. The top left, is that more realistic or abstracted?
It's still pretty abstracted, but it's more realistic than the rest.
Yeah, and it's obvious that it's a tree, isn't it?
Yeah.
Feels like it's more of an impressionist kind of tree, but it is very much still a tree. Now, in that center in the top, that is getting a little bit more abstracted, but is it easy to see the tree in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's relatively easy to see the tree in that. How about top right? Does anybody have a hard time seeing the tree in that one?
Yeah, I think if that one was on its own, I wouldn't really be able to see the tree.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. Now, I mentioned just a little bit about abstraction, where you're dealing with focusing on specific elements rather than the whole thing and simplifying. That top one, you can almost count. It looks to me like there's 6 or 7 different colors, and that's it that he's using. And the lines, even though they're all swooping and stuff like that, would you say that this is a simpler construction than the first one on the top left? Does this feel more simple or more complicated than the image, the blue image on the top left? What I get a feeling of is that the artist got excited about some elements of the tree and played with those and kind of left everything else unfocused. The impression I get is, we look at the trunk on the top left and we see all these curving lines right here and there. And over here, it looks like he's captured some of that, not trying to match the tree exactly, but trying to catch that idea of just the curviness of the branches. Can everybody see the branches in those curves?
Yeah.
Yeah, but like one of you said, if you didn't know this was a tree, is there any way that you could tell that it's a tree?
Not immediately, definitely. It would take me a while to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. And there are some clues, like you get some warm colors through here and these curves kind of start helping us realize that this is a trunk. These swoops kind of represent the canopy, and these are almost reminiscent of those diagonal lines in the kanji. But I think what's fascinating about this is he is focusing on different elements and simplifying them to the point where it feels to me that he had more fun doing the lines than trying to make sure that everybody knew this was a tree. And I really like that. I think it's fascinating. Now, if we go down here to the bottom left, this is where he starts exploring those ideas of just simplifying it to the point where he just has horizontal and vertical lines. And this one, I cannot see much of a tree at all. Can anybody see much of a tree in this one? The bottom left?
No, not really.
It's very difficult. And without somebody telling me what was there, I wouldn't know. But I still enjoy it. I think it's fascinating. And knowing where he was, or in the world history, where he is trying so hard to make sense and organize the chaos of all these new technologies and everything, it kind of makes sense to me that this starts looking like almost a street map seen from above of a large city, where it feels like he's really adding, overlaying a lot of organization onto this image of the tree. I think it's fascinating. Now here we get totally away from that. I don't know if there's any way to know or to pick up enough clues to figure out what what the subject matter is of this. But again, he is working on exploring different passages of what he sees and simplifying it. And that seems to be the hallmark of that high abstraction. The artist just keeps working on simplifying and focusing on elements as opposed to communicating the entire thing visually. And the colors kind of are interesting to me, I think, a little bit. They remind me of earthenware kind of colors, as opposed to really strong tree colors. And then when we move to this last one on the right, can anybody identify for me where they think the trunk is of the tree?
I think it's the two kind of gray, like horizontal gray squares at the bottom that form the trunk for me anyway.
I think that's really valid. Some people have said this black square here. Some people have said what you said. Some people said this vertical line. But I think we get into a realm where the artist has opened the communication channel up enough that it becomes a lot easier for us to kind of complete the image ourselves and make it our own. So I think if you see the trunk as those two horizontal gray rectangles, then it's the trunk. And that's how the picture is completed. But yeah, and I kind of like this because it engages you as the viewer to participate in what the artist is communicating in a very real sense, because there's no way to finish this picture or to understand what it is without you as the viewer being able to identify things in it. So where's the canopy of the tree? Where are the leaves and everything? Well, if the trunk is right there, these must be where the leaves are. And I can kind of see a relation a little bit, like this large red square area kind of fits in right with that. This area here kind of fits in a little bit right here. And this white area kind of makes me think of this area a little bit. But it's fascinating to me that he simplified the colors so much, simplified the shape so much, that without context, he's not discreetly communicating. And if we have the context, well, actually, we're, as viewers, we're pretty much forced to supply the context. So I think, now, let's see. I think I have another, nope, that's it. That's all to that. I am, okay. Can everybody see me again? All right, turn off screen share.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, good. Does this give you a better idea of what abstraction means? Just looking at that evolution of the tree?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. In your own work, in this carving that you're doing, I don't want you to feel obligated to carve like a cartoon character or anything specific. Sometimes it's a lot more fun, especially if you go for a walk around where you live, find a couple interesting branches and things like that. And one thing that you can do that is a really good process to go through is when you get back to your apartment, sit down and see if there's anything that you really like about what you found, what you picked up, and see if you can make a representation of it in a clump of that clay that you have in your kit. And by representation of it, I want you to do something like, maybe you brought home a stick and you really like the area where some of the smaller branches are coming out of one of the main branches in the stick. And you love how those different organic cylinders kind of join together. Then just explore that shape with your clay. And after a while, you don't keep looking or referring to the stick, but just kind of see what the clay wants to do and explore the shapes that you generate just playing with the clay. And that's how I would like you to approach the carving. So you're carving in a three-dimensional space, essentially just those parts of what you see that you really like, that you find fascinating. And you can separate it out of context, you can make it completely different, do whatever you want. But there's enough clay there that you can make, and I would prefer that you make 3 or 4 little different things and just kind of play with that idea. A lot of people find inspiration in sea life. That's really good to look at. If we look at things like seashells, um, like when urchins lose their spines, how that looks. Coral fans, the silica tube worms. Sea life does a lot of things that, from a land dwelling perspective, look incredibly abstracted. And that might be a fun thing to explore. So maybe your carving is going to be where your tear duct emerges into your eye socket, and you like that shape. Or maybe your carving is going to be looking at just the broken end of a stick where it's been worn down quite a bit by the weather. Maybe it is a fascinating area on a rock that you saw, and you really like the texture and you're exploring that. Or maybe you have a collection of seashells and you're just kind of combining a couple of different ideas of the seashells. When we talk about biomorphic, it's based essentially in the organic world, but also biomorphic means that's what you're using to inform the kind of shapes and the feel of it. You're not necessarily copying it. Does this clarify this assignment for people, and does this help?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any last questions before we separate for the day? Oh, and the last code word, by the way, is spaghetti. I was a volunteer minister in the South, and for some reason, families would invite us over, and they thought that all of us loved spaghetti, and it was because it was one of the cheapest meals. And when you're living on your own like that, you make the spaghetti yourself because that's what you can afford, and you really pray hard that everybody doesn't feed you all the time. But sadly, that didn't happen. Anyways, so the last code word is spaghetti. Any questions that I can address before we separate?
I do have one question. So, and I know that you've mentioned this before, but I just wanna clarify. Um, so your last email, because I thought that this class was gonna be like the full semester, but I guess it's just like one block. And so it's like everything is still the same, right? Like everything it can be turned in by the end of the semester, correct?
Right now, everything can be turned in. It needs to be turned in by the end of the course, which is June 25th.
Okay.
If you are taking this expecting it to go out farther than that, I'll need you to email me directly because I'll have to find out what we can do regarding grade submission. See what we need to do. But yeah, that's one of the reasons why this class is moves so quickly, because it is a block. Are most people able to keep up? I'm seeing that a lot of people are turning stuff in, and you guys seem to be keeping up all right. Is that true for the most part?
Yeah, I mean, like, at least for me. So I got a little bit behind last week, so I need to like catch up. That's why like Memorial Day is gonna be my catch up day. Yeah, but yeah, so I'm just a little behind, but I should catch up like this week.
All right, that's good. If you guys do have any questions about that, please email me right away and talk to me and let me know. So watch the video I did for Monday, and if you have any further questions or anything, like I said, please get a hold of me and let me know. I'm really hoping you guys have a wonderful and safe weekend. And again, our Monday meeting will be on Tuesday. Everybody should have that in their calendar. And it will only be about probably about 50, 55 minutes long is all. instead of the full hour and a half. And I marked everybody that was here down. Everybody that isn't here is listening to this, just email me with the code words. Thank you so much for being with me, and I will talk to you guys for sure on Tuesday. Good luck with everything and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.